Hello folks, we're in Elgin, Illinois at the Engineered Components Company, or ECC, and we have AJ Henriksen here as a continual guest on the program. He's I've been here for a couple days and he and his dad Arne Henriksen have been showing me around, and we're talking just an amazing bit of racing history here. Stay tuned, you'll see a lot of that on the show. Right now we're in the show and tell section of the show with AJ, and this is the part I'm really looking forward to, as Engineered Components has been a real friend to the sport, and I've always wanted to delve into what made them tick, and how they started and where they came from and things like that. And the people that remember supercars today, the publication in paper form, remember Arne and AJ advertising Engineered Components Company in our pages. And like I say, always a friend to this outlet, and but I would say more like a quiet part, or more or less. You don't see a lot of a lot of bling and a lot of fancy things. You just see the company, they're there. They'll sneak up on you when you're least expect it, and it's like, oh hey, Engineered Components Company, or ECC on the hood, on the side of the cars, or whatever. But AJ, I appreciate you being on this segment of the show and tell, and you ready to get started?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Definitely.
So, first thing that I wanted to talk about when I found out about your love for anything with four wheels was your skateboarding.
Yeah. So yeah, when I was pretty young, about 7 years old or so, my neighbor got a skateboard, and I immediately wanted one. So it was just it was a really fun thing to do. A lot of freedom. You can do your own thing, and then there's the competitive side of it as well. So it's just a thing that I've done since I've been about 7 years old. Continue to do when my body allows it, when time allows it. It's just a fun thing to do, and I did that for every day for so many years. Now it's more like once a month, but yeah, I got hooked on it pretty early, along with racing. I started going to races at a very young age. My dad, being involved in racing in his early career, worked for Bob Chapman with Bill Lutz and some other drivers for
legendary names in this area, the Chicago area.
In the 60s. And then he kind of got out of it for a while, got busy starting his business, and got back into it with Bob Schacht in mid 80s. His dentist, actually, my dad's dentist, is the one who tipped him off, and hey, you should hook up with Bob Schacht if you're interested in racing. And immediately my father got hooked. I mean, at the time Bob was doing really well in the IRA and ARCA, and then immediately I was hooked as a kid, going to some of these early races. Like this picture here was a race in Milwaukee, IRA race at Milwaukee, where Bob had won, and that was probably one of my first races, if not the first I went to.
And full disclosure, because we had Bob on the show recently, that is not a football you're holding.
Right, it's just a plastic helmet. There's a visor, and yeah, it looks like stitches, but it's a maroon helmet or reddish helmet with checkered flags down the middle, and then the flag that he won that day.
So that's been in your blood since you can
ever since.
remember.
And yeah, like I said, that was about 1985 there, and 10 years later, I was old enough to finally make my first start in ARCA.
Yeah, and that first start in ARCA, let's talk about that a bit. Obviously, you're an adrenaline junkie, speed junkie. Skateboarding probably is not in your future anymore. It's probably more of a young man's,
absolutely
deal. You watch the X Games, and oh my gosh, the stuff they do.
It's amazing.
Can't imagine doing that at 40 and 50. And
right, yeah. The stuff that you see like 8-year-old kids pull off on bikes and snowmobiles and skateboards it's insane these days.
Is that something that maybe, okay, I can't do that forever? A lot of guys say I was on motocross, or I was on skateboards, or BMX bikes or whatever, and they get hurt real bad. And I don't know if you got hurt real bad or whatever, but okay, the introduction of Bob Schacht, is that what led you to the four-wheel, engine in front of you?
A little bit, yeah, pretty much. It's like, at the time I didn't have a go-kart or anything like that, and it was, I made my first actual racing start in ARCA, which is kind of a rare start for a career. Most people, especially these days, go-karts and then hobby stocks, pro stocks,
Bandoleros, Legends, and yeah.
They worked their way, yeah. So that was kind of different the way that I started. But it was interesting to people. It was like, wow, this is pretty cool, and ARCA allowed it because they made sure that I tested well, and we went to the racetrack and did an open test, and they made sure that everything was going to be okay, and it ended up working out okay. And for a while there, we weren't sure of which track we were going to pick for our first start. We had mentioned Flat Rock, and I think even people like yourself were like, no, you can't do Flat Rock. It's like, oh, maybe we'll do,
sure, Ron
Kill
Drager
Care.
loved to hear that.
Like, no, we can't do Kill Care. It's it's Kill Car. Like, okay, we won't go there. How about Shady Bowl? Well, no. So I was like, well, Owasso. I was like, okay, you know what? That fits perfectly. In the time, I'm going to be 16 for a few months, so that kind of worked out. We were trying to do some of those other tracks I just mentioned were a little bit earlier, to where if I would have done like Flat Rock or Kill Care, I would have been like 16 years old in a few days, which would have stuck a lot longer until they changed the rules recently where you can be younger now. But Owasso made sense. It was family-owned racetrack from the Simcoe family. So the ties there with Schacht and Patty Simcoe, that it made sense there. Very forgiving racetrack. You can run 3 wide there all day long. There was no wall in the back straightaway, and this, it just made sense. And my dad ended up actually sponsoring that race. So it was called the Engineered Components 200.
So yeah, we got some photos from there. The next little bit there, and you were born in 1979, and this is 1995, and you were all of what?
Yeah, 16 at that time.
Wow. How'd you feel? Was you intimidated? Like, oh my God, what
yeah,
am I doing?
Well, I was very intimidated.
Schrader was in the field that day.
Sure was. Yeah, it's been a stacked field for quite some years, especially in those years. Extremely competitive. Yeah, it was a little intimidating for sure, not having any experience except for testing around the racetrack by myself and following Bob a little bit. So, and there wasn't like immediate natural ability. I will admit I had to work pretty hard to get some sort of talent to do what I do.
You sound so race car driver like. I'm great.
True.
I bow when I win.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun, and that kind of led to during that time. Towards the end of '96, was like, I needed to get some more laps besides the limited number of ARCA races I was doing to get some short track seat time. Came across American Race Truck Series at the SEMA show in November of '96. They were looking for a Midwest distributor, and we thought it was a pretty cool deal. It was a really very affordable vehicle. At the time, they were like $13,200 for a turnkey race car. It was not bad,
But we're not talking the full size like NASCAR Craftsman trucks.
No, it was like a GM metric frame, like a streetcar frame with Speedway motors did the bodies for them, spec Jasper engine. They used the stock GM 10 bolt that was in there, but you couldn't even use a Ford 9 or anything expensive. It was pretty limited series. $60 shocks that they would constantly. We made sure they were
$60 shocks.
They were traded out to where tech, if they figured you were doing something wrong, it's like, hey, let me see your right front, and they would trade you and give you what it should be the same. It was kind of a cool way to do it, and a lot of series actually do that to this day, to keep people honest. But it was cool because we basically started that series in the Midwest. Started out as an exhibition. The first American Race Truck Series Midwest race was a non-points race. It was at Salem. Worked a deal with ARCA where they gave us 20-lapper. Just to get like a little exhibition. There was only 4 trucks. It was me, my brother, and 2 trucks that we had sold. And that's where it was at that time. During that season, it caught like insane, like wildfire. At the end of the season, there was 20 to 30 trucks. And the next season, we sent home 10 to 20. It was crazy. But the truck thing was interesting because ARCA at the time needed to save their Pro 4 series. And I had a few people, Joe Wells and some other individuals, Ron Drager even, and ARCA say, hey, it's pretty cool, and what is it? And it was too far from what they wanted to do to start their own truck series. So basically, they took the idea kind of ish and said, we need to do a truck series, and they basically rebodied, the 4-cylinder class.
One with the smaller S10
Right,
Ranger type of
to
thing.
save the series, basically.
Yeah.
I think they're V8s now. I think they're still currently doing I think it's V8s now, or they transitioned into V8s. But to save the series,
I think you can run whatever you want.
the truck thing really caught the attention of people in that series. Something different versus looking at a 4-cylinder car, So that was kind of a pretty cool accomplishment, I feel like, to basically, I was 17 at that time, putting together a schedule, calling people and calling speedways and putting together a solid yet affordable schedule, nothing back to back and nothing crazy far out of the Indiana, Ohio area. But then it turned into like we were at IRP every Thursday night for like 16 Thursdays in a row or something like that is what it evolved into in the late 90s. So it was very cool, very, very fun time.
So the truck series, you're basically, you're this no offense, but you're this kid, and you're like one of the major players in in a racing series now, running this truck series.
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, calling promoters and getting different feedback from once it got bigger. There were some drivers like, hey, why don't we go to some dirt tracks? And so I put that on the schedule, and why did I do that? There's
Now I got to
like
inspect
3
them.
people that thought I was awesome, and like 30 that are like, why are we here? So it's eventually it was cool though, but it got huge to where there was regional, there was Florida series, Midwest series, the West Coast series started well before the others, but it got to where it was a lot of fun and extremely competitive. The very last one we did was we actually won at the Speed Weeks '98. Of course, I ran the 75.
Of course. And then what happened? It just
It was about 1999/2000-ish. We just kind of had our own agendas. It was a little bit ugly at first, honestly. He ended up talking to me about 6 years later, so it wasn't too bad. It just, he wanted to run full time. I wanted to run full time. Neither of us could probably run full time with the money we had. It was just I think we were both a little greedy, and the competitiveness came out, and we wanted to both do more than we were doing. We were both doing 6 to 7 races a year. So, I mean, everything happens for a reason. It ended up working out for the good for both of us. I mean, he ended up having a lot of success with many different people, in his rental thing. The cars he built for Dubai, and it ended up working out for both of us. And the way that I carried on with my career might not have been suitable for, it might not have worked out with Bob because of the way that we both were. We were very alike. I mean, I learned a lot from the man. I mean, everything I knew about a race car up until 2000 was from Bob Schacht. So it was, we might have butted heads a little bit there towards the breakup because we were so alike and wanted the same thing, and we couldn't both have
two
that.
dads.
Right, and, yeah. So, and then I got in a pretty bad car crash where I got ejected out of sunroofs during that time. Fractured 5 bones and couldn't hardly walk for a while. So that was kind of a weird timing of when that all happened, where I was out for about damn near a year. And when I came back, I took my late model to Concord, a local track at Concord, and tested, just an open test day. And the guy helping me, his name was Bo. He said, you're running times where you can be competitive here in the next race. He's like, okay. He's like, when's the next race? He's like, well, it's Friday. I'm like, okay, well, it's Wednesday. I'm like, well, okay. So we went and did it. And I never raced so hard for 18th in my entire life. I mean, because it was Concord. I mean, I stepped in there as my first time there, and I'm running against 10 guys that are battling for a championship.
And trying to press
and I'm not going to run into anybody and be that guy, So it was a wake-up call to like, wow, like I thought I was like done. Like I'm done. Like, I broke my back. I can't drive anymore. It's kind of heartbreaking where I thought I was it. Then went back to Speed Weeks in 2000 with the parts, or no, not the parts. It was the Cars Championship Auto Racing Series that Morris Kaufman out of Indianapolis started that series. Basically, they were American race trucks rebodied. That's all they were. Because the American race truck thing got to where there was so many of them that there was guys going home. Like, I don't want to go home over and over and over. And I got to only do a qualifying race. So it's like, okay, well, let's start a whole nother series. Tear your truck up, and you're ready to put a body on it. Just, call Morris Kaufman and run in the same weekend and everything. So we went down there and we won Speed Weeks in 2000. So that was like, okay, we're back. I mean, we're feeling pretty good to where we can continue on. And then at that time, we're thinking about doing speedways and going from running a half a dozen short tracks a year to doing, a speedway program. So by that time, I had qualified now to go to Michigan. After you do so many short track races, then you can do that. So we did Michigan with a car that we called Gary. It was an old Gary Weinbauer car. Ended up selling it a few years later to Michael Simcoe, actually, and he did fairly well with it.
Well, your first start at Owasso, that's 95. Now you're, and I guess you should have been qualified by then, but with all the other stuff going on, like the truck series, and then you got in your accident. I mean, I assume that's what took, not that you had to get qualified. I'm sure you qualified.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, they made sure that you did 5 to 6 tracks, half mile, or 1 mile and under, basically. It was a little bit different than it is now as far as qualifications to go around a 2-mile racetrack at 200 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. That was kind of like the way that we had to do it. I think that was proper. I think that's the way it should be. But it's kind of not.
Again,
that way.
so on race car driver, like everybody wants to just jump right in. What do you mean I'm not qualified? What do you mean I can't run? For a guy to say, I probably need a little more seat time, and maybe I should, wait a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So my first start with a speedway was Michigan. I qualified 11th or 12th. I think we finished 10th or 11th, something like that.
I always remember you in the hunt on the speedways.
And then the next race was the following weekend. Was my second speedway start was Pocono, which was awesome. It was a lot of fun. It was fun, but it was also a little intimidating. It was my first time at Pocono as a driver, and
can't imagine going to the end of that
I ended
straightaway.
up qualifying fourth in my first Pocono start. Kerry Earnhardt ended up winning that race, which was awesome. But we qualified fourth, finished 8th. But a lot of times during that race, I was right there next to Bob, and it was intimidating at times, and
which is what his specialty was. Bob
it
intimidated
was
people.
Our first time on the racetrack together after we had the split, and it was at Pocono, which he's
a Pocono master.
Yeah, him and Tim Steele, and then they both won 6 times there. Honestly, so it was intimidating. At the time, we weren't talking and stuff like that, but ended up finishing 8th, finishing good, and it was a good weekend. And then we did about a half a dozen races that year, and then we continued on, did about a half a dozen per year, 01, 02.
And like I said, I always remember you in the hunt. Were you starting to get nibbles? I mean, Engineer Components is not a cheap company. They're very generous in what they do for racers. But I mean, you're not in like a Hendrick car. You're not in an Everham car. You're not basically not in a Schacht car anymore.
Right.
You're in your own stuff. But now you're running top 10, and like you said, at the time they're sending cars home from ARCA races. But are you getting nibbles now?
I was, and I just wanted to do our own thing, to be honest with you. I didn't know how or when we were going to move up. It was more so like, let's keep this family thing going. Let's find some money to help us. Like we eventually did. Fastenal was a huge help with us.
Back then, Fastenal, who?
Yeah, exactly. There was times where I blew off several opportunities because it was like, well, why would I spend that money with you when we're at times beating you? And why would I spend the money to drive a sponsored Hendrick car or something like that? Which, to be honest with you, I was offered to drive that '87 Ditech car after Kyle Busch did his dominance in ARCA. They offered it to me, and I thought, "Woo, this is gonna be great," And then they started talking about, well, it's gonna cost this and that. I was like, "Sorry, that's a lot more than we can do it for, and we might not beat you a lot, but there's times where we did outrun Kyle Busch when he didn't win." Mm-hmm. I was like, "No, I can't do that." And then they ended up, renting it to people like Blake Fees and Kyle Krisaloff and stuff like that. So And there was other offers where I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. I felt like I was
There's always a string attached. Seems
something.
like.
Yeah. And then just kind of stuck with the family thing. I mean, there was times where I drove for different people just because there was a thing where it's like, hey, buy some tires and let's go do this. Like McClure, for example, Jeff McClure. We've done deals together like that. Bobby Jones did a few deals like that to where we just kind of covered some simple expenses and we both just threw money in a pile and went racing, So, there was never any like, when am I going to move up? Or it was always the just let's stick with ARCA and try to just eventually maybe do a full schedule. It was kind of maybe the goal at one time.
Well, you had your speedway program together because I remember the Charlotte race in 03. You're in the CLR car, and I mean you were up front all day, and then they're on a caution. Shelmerdine stays out, and you're looking at his rear bumper, and driving for James, and then okay, I'm sure you were saying, track looks great.
Oh, I couldn't wait to go. Yeah, we were pretty fast. We didn't have a winning car, I will admit. A lot of the winning cars were behind us because of pit strategy. Kyle Busch, but stuff like that. I think Casey Mears too was in that one. But I knew if it went green that I had it because Kirk wasn't nearly as fast as I was, but I'm sure he was praying for rain. So that's the way it went down. But that was our best finish. I did that again, I think at Pocono a few years later. But that was CLR's best finish as well. So that was a good deal.
Brian Holman photo.
They rented space from us at our shop in Mooresville, which is kind of how that deal went together. They were a little behind on rent, and we worked something out.
Sometimes that's the best way to work it out.